Hey, Stoney here with another game of Mechabellum, and this is a real treat. We have two of the very best players in the world going at it in a classic standard game. Alright, let's go. At the bottom here, we have a very strong 201 player, often known as the Red Hair. He's a 2300 MMR player, and is playing as a Typhoon Specialist. And at the top, we have none other than B-Man, a 2100 MMR player, also from a 201 server. He's playing as a Rhino specialist. Having played both of these players, they both favor very standard, very defensive play. They both love Stormcallers. They have a very strong understanding of range and also chaff waves. And this is the type of game that confuses me the most. A lot of new players, they complain about aggro, but aggro, in comparison to this very heavily defensive plays, is actually easier to understand. Because aggro, the timing or the focus of your battlefield is very defined, right? It's the distance between the midline to your tower. And all you have to think about is, how do I get my opponent's army away from the tower so that my army can get tower and kill my opponent? Whereas in defensive play, you don't really have that luxury, because both of your army will essentially be shooting from like the 50-meter range from tower into each other for like 90 seconds. There's usually very little flanking going on, because the investment you're going to have with the flanking is not going to be paid off, because most of his army is going to be intact anyway. So that little bit of disruption is not going to make that much of a difference. All right, so round two here, we have the reinforcement cards, but our blue player did decide to take a wasp spawn here, and there is going to be some sort of anti-air in the form of these fans. The wasp can be a little strong, but we'll see with the timing of these Stormcallers. If the Stormcaller can land a few good volleys onto these fans, then the wasp really can't do anything, but right now it seems like the fans are taking care of the wasp just fine. Whenever we see standard play like this, you have to increase your chaff line by like a magnitude of 3. So what I mean by that is, when you're playing aggro, right, your chaff of choice is probably going to be crawlers. They are always going to be in front of whatever other units that you have, because they're a melee unit. And they are tankier. They have more models. But the problem with crawlers is that they move very fast. So in an aggro game, your round typically ends in the first 90 seconds. Whereas in standard, often your round can go on for, oh geez, like the entire duration of 200 seconds. So you have to be very careful of what you do when you're playing standard. So speaking of really long chaff lines, so when you're looking at standards, in order for your chaff line to actually last for that full 200 seconds, you're not going to be using crawlers, because even if you put the crawler all the way in the back line here, that crawler is going to be killed in about 70 seconds at most, because it will be running around here, right? If you have crawlers around here, I mean, just watch these crawlers at the bottom, probably less than 70 seconds. So what you need as far as chaff goes is you need to have fangs all the way at the back line, as our blue player is doing here. In fact, both of them will probably be doing that very soon. All right, the board is shaping up to be very similar. The only difference right now is we have Typhoon from our blue player, because he's a Typhoon spec and now with the item, and also range arc lights, whereas our red player, they're simply adding more chaff. So as you can see right now, fangs in the back line, right? Why is that? Because this game is going to go on for at least 150 seconds, or at least 100, why am I saying 150 seconds? At least 90 seconds, which means by the time these units at the front died, these fans will come in and start tanking shots from the Stormcaller. So this is one of those nuances that is very difficult to master in standard. All right, both fans are coming in just at the right time, as you can see here. And the Stonecrawlers never really got an opportunity to aim at other Stonecrawlers. Like right now, most of the Stonecrawler were killed because of these other units, like the Typhoon here. Alright, getting to round 4. Round 4 is a power spike round for our red player because of the Rhino being the Rhino spec. Unit drop here, I think Farseer and Phoenix both are very strong. And they both took one of each. The Phoenix being strong is just because in a long game like this, having some sort of late long-range air units is good because your Stonecrawler will most likely deal with the direct counter to Phoenix, mostly fans, Mustangs, maybe a fort. Sometimes they'll go with AA Marksman, but in this case, it's not likely. A blue player went with the Farseers. I think Farseer is a great choice because they can deal with the Phoenixes fairly effectively in the end. And also, they provide the multi-role of Chaff clear in the very end, because these Arclights are not going to survive for very long. And Farseer, especially if they take range at some point, right now they're at 125, but if they do take range at 165, they can actually do quite a lot of damage. All right, we got distraction crawlers at the front. And of course, the big Rhino at the back coming in. This Rhino is going to do so much work this round, I feel. Simply because there's just not enough heavy hitters from our blue player. Round 4 to round 5 is where this sort of standard play begin to solidify a little bit, because both sides will have adequate chaff clear. And also they will have enough Stormcallers to kind of get rid of each other's units. So it really just comes down to what happens after your Chaff war has ended. Advanced targeting taken from both sides. It is a very expensive reinforcement. It costs 400 supplies plus the 50 that you would have otherwise gotten if you didn't pick a reinforcement. So that's a net of 450 supplies, so that's a very expensive card. However, when you're into range fights like this, that additional 10 meters is going to make all the difference. That additional 10 meters is going to be the difference between a Arclight that's dead because you've got outranged by the Stormcrawlers, or Arclight that survived. Alright, both sides are doing very similar things. We have mobile beacon crawlers going all the way to one side. We're trying to disrupt the army formation for both sides. Still no answer directly to the Phoenixes. The Farseer did get range, so I think they will fare a little bit better into those Phoenixes, but this one on the right is already being targeted, already killed, and the one on the left was already killed as well, which means there's going to be another round to our red player. And after round 5, this is when things get real confusing. Because as you can see right now, right, if you're just judging by the board and ask yourself the question, what is the biggest problem for our blue player? And the answer could be, well, it's those Phoenixes. And if that is the answer, the Fortress is going to be the way to go. Looking at this unit pack, I think red is going to expect Fortress on blue's board, and red is going to take the melting point. So I see Fortress for blue, and a melting point for red. Vulcan is also interesting, but we have so many Stonecrawlers that's already on the field, and Stonecrawler could actually be a pretty effective system to deliver fire. Alright, so Fortress. And probably a melting point somewhere. There's the melting point. Now the real question is, will Fortress take Fort AA? Under normal circumstances, I would definitely encourage Fort AA. However, both sides did take the advanced targeting system, which means Phoenixes, with its range enhancement, with the advanced targeting system, are shooting at 170 meters. The Fort AA only reaches a range of 170 meters, which means if red decides to take temp range, then these forts will rarely shoot at these phoenixes with 488. So a bit of a slight miscalculation here for our blue player, if that was what the original game plan is with the for AA. Alright, another wave of Wasp being summoned here, and Wasp is actually decent. It not only can tank the shots from the Phoenixes, but it can also tank shots from the Mountain Point. The Stormcrawlers, this one has got high explosive on the blue side, and they actually both have high explosive, so chaff clear is so important. High explosive allows you to take out a pack of fangs in on average 1 fewer volleys. But it does deal 40% less damage into giant units like the Mountain Point. So there's the pros and cons. If you don't have good anti-giant or anti-HP units, you're going to have a bad time. And right now it seems like our red player has most of his side covered. Now these Phoenixes are going to do so much work here. Now let's see if the Farseer can actually get to the Phoenixes. And it looks like the answer is yes, because the lack of chaff clear. Perfect. Alright. Missile Strike and EM. EM is just a well-rounded card. Missile Strike has the potential of being blocked by shield. Whereas EM, even if it lands on shield, it gets value. If I am the red player, I think this is time to start exploiting other parts. Like last round, we already saw weakness in terms of anti-unit or anti-giant. So this round, I think if he wants to go even more giant, I wouldn't mind even more Mountain Point, but the Mountain Point is going to have a bit of a problem with these super late arriving fans. Sandworm might be an option at some point. Sandworm is pretty self-sufficient, and if you keep them, you can use them either at the front or at the very back. And if you use them at the very back, they can actually tank a whole lot of shots and also deal with chaff. Blue's problem is just at the very late stage of the round. His only damage output is going to be HG Stonecrawlers, which don't deal effectively into giants, and then Farseers, which are mediocre at best when playing into giants. Oil gets picked by both sides in round 7. That's very interesting. And as you can see, very similar strategy, like as if they practiced this before. And I've seen this type of play, right? Recently, I was at the mini tournament up against B-Man, and he used almost this exact same play with 4 squads of HE, with 4 squads of his Stonecrawlers, and just a line of Marksman. Marksman with range Arclight. So very difficult to go against. Arclight actually got Elite Marksman for our blue player, and also for our red player. And I don't believe the Elite Marksman here is for the damage output, but is mostly just for the range. Because as long as they both can keep your enemy at bay here, the Stormcrawlers are just going to kill everything else. And as the game goes longer, right, this game becomes more and more confusing because every single round ends in very similar fashion. So if you're looking at this board, you have a pretty hard time. Unlike aggro, like you know exactly if you win in the Chaff war, you know exactly if you're having any issues with larger units. But in a standard game like this, where both players are just going for ultra range, this could be a bit of a problem. I think right now, the blue player has more problems to solve than the red player because of these Phoenixes. There are already a level 3, and this one's already got item. At some point, they can take Elite Marksman, which gives them even more range. And you notice that those 2 forts were eventually sold off because Fort AA is no longer viable with these additional ranged Phoenixes. For our red player, I think one good option if he wants to lean into that is actually get Siege Scorpions. Siege Scorpions are quite good into late game, especially into units like these. They do decent damage. I mean, for level 3 Farseer, it probably needs a few levels on those Scorpions, but they definitely do decent damage. They outrange pretty much everything on the board, and they can tank quite a bit. And because our red player already has this line of Phoenixes and now triple tech with shield and with the Marksman, so giving them a bit of a staying power to contest the Farseers in the end. The real MVP this round, I think, is going to be this level 3 Farseer. Let's see how many Phoenixes it gets. It's just a non-stop barrage of Stormcallers. Now, when you're trying to judge the effectiveness of your board in this ultra standard, ultra long range position, take a look at your Chaff line, right? And one way to tell if your Chaff line is effective or inadequate is by looking at how often does your Stormcallers get targeted by your opponent's Stormcallers. And if the answer is often, then you probably need additional Chaff at the front. But this is a very close game. I mean, we got a few Phoenixes left over, like a single or two Stormcallers. That's a very close game. Most of it is attributed to RNG here. Another EM it gets offered, and both players went for the EM is the safer choice. There's still no adequate AA here, aside from these range Farseer. And these Farseer are now shooting 190 meters, whereas the Stormcallers at 205. The Phoenixes, though, this guy here at 205, so it's not going to be a big difference. I think the Farseer right now are just about the same range as the Phoenixes, but the Phoenixes will continue to level, and every time they level, they get an additional 5 meters in range. Arclight actually got the third tech in the form of AA ammunition. I'm not entirely sure about that. Because for one, these Arclights will probably never reach the Phoenixes. There's like a 40-meter gap between the Arclight and the Phoenix. So I wonder if the AA was more for a Wasp pivot? I'm not sure. I don't think this is a very good tech here. Like, this could be okay if you are confident with winning the Chaff War, which means the Arclights get to walk forward just a little bit more. But right now, I don't think the Arclights walk forward and do enough damage to the Phoenix. As far as Wasp clear goes, I mean, the Farseer would do just as well of a job at Wasp clear than compared to AA Arclights. This one on the far right is actually locking onto a high-level Phoenix because these Phoenixes were actually EM'd on this particular round, so they lost all of their range advantage. But yeah, as you can see on the other side, where the Phoenixes still had their tech, the Arclight did absolutely nothing. And this is a very strong round here for our red player. So blue player is in a bit of a trouble. And the Phoenixes are growing just a little too big, and I feel like if you want to have a definitive answer against these Phoenixes, you either can put down AA Marksman, and here's the Marksman. Or you're just going to need a few more Farseers. But Farseer would need to be protected because they do get outranged by the Phoenixes. Whereas Marksman take range, take AA, you can actually outrange Phoenixes before they get too big. Alright, unit drops here. We got Sandworm, got instant pick by our red player. And I think our blue player could either go with Marksman or Sandworm. So it's indeed going to be Marksman. And I do expect the Marksman to get range and AA. Okay, so range is being picked. These are level 5 marksmen, so maybe even take elite instead of AA. They're a little bit more expensive, but they can do a lot of damage to these sandworms. Now, he doesn't know the existence of this sandworm. Shooting squad? That is very interesting. I would have never thought that shooting squad would be a second tech. Elite did go down, so now this marksman, especially this level 5, does 25,000 damage per shot. So yeah, they're pretty good. Sandworm being mobile beacon directly into the middle here, where the chaff is super weak. And there's 3 of them, and one of them is level 4 with armor, a total of 418,000 HP. So it's going to take quite a lot from these marksmen to get to those. Fangs, they are pretty good. But are they good enough to stop the advancement of these double-teched sandworms? That's the question. One of them is already going down. The big worm, though, is still alive. All the marksmen are aiming at that one particular sandworm and is just doing so much tanking. Alright, finally being brought down. And now we're moving on to the rest of the army. These marksmen are no joke. They are shooting at 230 meters, so outranging even the largest Phoenix by 25 meters. And that's even without AA. So if he wants, he can take AA, and all of a sudden, Red is in a bit of trouble. So how did Blue win this round? Well, truth to be told, is a very complex answer, but I think the simplest way to answer is just more chaff. With the additional 6 more marksmen, each one producing 5 more fans. That's 30 fans, but that's not 30 fans in a single squad. These are actually 30 fans kind of spread out 6 ways. And that just means 6 more volleys from these Stonecallers. Nuke gets instant pick by both players. Oil is also off cooldown. And this could very well be the final round here, with B-Man going down to only 800 HP. However, there's always a way for these Sandworm. So the way I like about these Sandworm right in the middle is because of this. Having them in the middle allows you to hit left and right and mid. It's very flexible this way. Right now, these worms are nothing but a huge distraction. And also just a big ram going into the tower. Now they have Sudden Strike, so 4 worms with Sudden Strike can pretty much kill an entire cluster of things every time they pop out, and it's very powerful. Chaff Clear shouldn't be too big of a problem. Ignite gets picked for Fangs. That's interesting, because right now there's really nothing on the Blue's boards that calls for Ignite, so very curious what that was in response to. I think that was mostly for maybe a fort response. Red did sell the melting point at some point. So instead of going melting point into the forts, he decided just to go with Ignite on the fans. Or maybe it was for a war factory, because that could also be a pretty good answer into massive sandworms. Alright, sandworm going around. Nuke lands, but does not really kill anything. It kills some chaff at the front though, so there's lack of chaff. And now the sandworm emerges. And with Sudden Strike, it kills the initial line of chaff very quickly. And now they're going to go under. I'm going to try that one more time. So there's no answer for the sandworm at this point. There's just not enough damage output. Luckily, there's going to be a tower capture, I think, on the far right. And that gives not so much. The marksman did die. Looking at the HP here, I think our red player may actually win this. Depends on how many units these sandworms kill. We still have a level 4, I believe. Yeah. Level 4 sandworms still on the field. Plus, 2 more level 1 sandworms and now with tower. And that should just be enough to win this game. So, what are some takeaways from this ultra defensive game? Well, first of all, range is king. When you're playing aggro, speed is king because you want to get to the tower very quickly. But when you're playing standard, you don't really need to run into your opponent because they will run into you eventually. So having range and even having range early with the advanced targeting system sometimes is worth it. Number 2, creating problems in the air. I think our blue player never really addressed this air problem until ultra late into the game with the Marksman drop. But even then, that was not a definitive answer, right? These Phoenixes continue to do so much damage. This one right here, 288,000 damage in this entire game. And then finally, having some sort of large unit distraction if your opponent does not have end of round damage output is very good. And this is what this Swarm served, right? Not only is a great distraction at the front as well, but it's just at the very late game, especially with the larva at level 4, blue just doesn't have a lot of units to take care of those. So a great game, a very complex game from 2 top players in the world. And I hope you liked the video, and there is another game just for you. And I will see you on the next one.
Prepare your tactics. Mechabellum's calling. Deploy your fortress. The battlefield's alive with swarms.